Welcome to 15 Minutes of Feminism, part of our On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin at Ms. Magazine platform. As you know, we report, rebel, and we tell it just like it is. And on 15 Minutes of Feminism, we count the minutes in our own feminist terms. And in this episode, I'm so delighted to be joined by Representative Hilary Scholten. It's as we are back to school and with matters of gun safety and policies that benefit mothers and families that are really on our minds. These are the kinds of things that matter at home, in schools, in Congress, in our nation, and as we are gearing up for the 2024 elections. These are major issues this election season. How can we ensure that children and families aren't just safe, but that they can thrive? Now, helping us to think through these issues and to set the record straight is Representative Hilary Scholten. She is a member of Congress who serves Michigan's 3rd Congressional District. Now, sit back, take a listen, and enjoy this episode. Representative Scholten, thank you so much for joining us for this 15 minutes of feminism where we count the minutes in our own feminist terms. Thank you for joining.
That's fantastic. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
We always do a back to school episode, and it's a real honor and privilege to do this with you, especially given that one of the issues that has been so near and dear to the work that you've been doing is on gun violence. Can you give our listeners a reason why?
Yeah, I'm the first mom in history to represent my part of the state in Congress. And that means bringing a keen attention to detail that are facing the next generation, facing our kids. And unfortunately, we live in an age when gun violence is the number one killer of children, of individuals under 21 years of age. It is remarkable. I don't know why this is not grind everything to a halt and fix this moment in our country, but it should be. We live in a part of the country where everyday gun violence is also plaguing our communities. I lost a neighbor 2 years ago to gun violence. My kids have had to duck and cover at our neighborhood pool. They've been undergoing school drills for active shooter situations since they were in pre-K. And so this is an issue that impacts their lives and it impacts our lives. Making sure that we are creating a safe and livable world for our children is a top priority for me.
This is a time in which we've seen a recent assassination attempt on a presidential candidate. And as you say, it's a moment in which this is come so close to you, a neighbor, the kinds of matters that your kids have had to contend with. What do you think is on the mind of moms in 2024 as their kids are back to school?
Well, I know it is top of mind for so many moms as they think about, what the new school year brings. And, unfortunately, here in Michigan, we've had not one, but two school shootings in recent years, Oxford High School and Michigan State University, higher level, but schools nonetheless. And I think, that really underscores the issue about even though relative perhaps to the number of days that most students experience an educational setting free from being shot at themselves, gun violence is still an everyday reality for so many students because the trauma of gun violence in schools is not only just the incident, but the reverberating impact, the mental health impact, the trauma that so many other students feel because they know it's a reality. I'll never forget after the Uvalde shooting, I had a fourth grader, and we made the choice to talk to the kids about it. We don't always insert national trauma into our everyday conversation, but my son was going to get up and go back to school the next day. And we knew that he might likely hear about it from some friends, and we wanted to be able to give context to him and provide this information in a safe space and reassure him. And I'll never forget, telling his sweet angelic face this news, and just watching him process it and take it in. And he said, Mom, we practice for these kinds of things in school. I never really knew that it was real. And just the way that it changed his perception of what could be. Last week we had a Giffords event in our district. Gabby Giffords, obviously a huge gun violence prevention advocate, and a young woman shared her story about how trauma at the MSU shooting had impacted her own life because her brother was there. Knowing,
Mhm.
students at Oxford, just knowing that these things could happen, right? Whenever there's a loud noise or a scuttle, students are thinking, is it happening now to me? We don't have to live like this, and I raised my hand to run in large part because we don't have to, and we won't if I have anything to do about it.
Well, this is so important because, as your son noted, there are children who are already practicing for this. And so there's a way in which it's become so normalized, as
Yeah.
normal as recess, right?
Yep.
As normal as line up in the hallway and go to arts class if arts classes are in the kids' school, which they're not in many.
Not in every
But
school.
this deep normalization of trauma, such that you're entering the conversation even after your son has had to practice
Yep.
what to do about this.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. And we're just allowing students as young as I mean, they practice in preschool. Students as young as 4, 5 years old, kindergartners, thinking, what am I going to do if someone comes into this safe place, my tambourine circle, and starts shooting at me? It's just
Mhm.
unconscionable.
Well, when you think about it, these days, then how for probably for better, but so worse for our nation in a way, backpacks now with special safety features, such that if someone enters a classroom and begins shooting at a child before the backpack goes down, that perhaps the backpack will minimize the impact. And of course, it's hard to minimize impact given the power and force of the kind of weapons that are so accessible. Here's what you've been quoted as saying. Um, in the past 3 years, there have been at least 75 fatal shootings in Grand Rapids, and
Mhm.
32% of people live near a shooting in the city of Grand Rapids. And you've said that that is too many. And my goodness, isn't it?
Mhm.
Too many have experienced the horror of gun violence, even if they themselves were not on the other end of the firearm. That's pretty chilling, and a pretty chilling observation that certainly has to be on the minds of parents as the school year opens.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was mentioning earlier, it's not just the gun violence that, these school shootings that get national attention, Uvalde and Oxford. It is the everyday gun violence as well. If your kids are walking home from school or going over to a friend's house afterwards where, guns might not be safely stored. It's a question of, how and in what proximity are individuals living to these dangerous weapons, sometimes weapons of war, when we're talking about high capacity magazines, et cetera. It's too much.
That's right. And certainly thinking about the Supreme Court in this last year's term with bump stocks being something that can't be regulated in the way in which legislation had proposed is also quite disconcerting.
Yeah.
So I want to pivot just a bit. So you've not just been the first woman, but the first mother to represent your district, as you mentioned. And so, many of our listeners would want to know, does being a mother impact your policy priorities? And in fact, it's a question for everyone as there are more women who are coming into political power, and the backdrop had always been that it was a liability for women to be in positions of power and yet bring with them the fact that they are a mother or a caregiver. How do you see that?
Oh, I mean, absolutely not. It is an added benefit to the work that I do. When we're talking about, the things like this massive public health crisis of gun violence, when we're talking about healthcare more generally, where women and mothers are the number one, overwhelmingly by like 70 to 80% majority, the number one decision makers on healthcare related issues in the home. It's incumbent that we have women, mothers in positions of power who are making these decisions. And I serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in Congress, Dr. Goodwin, and I will be the first one to say our roads and bridges are also women's issues. If we
They
break
certainly are.
on the way to work or to get our kid from school, that impacts our ability to provide for our family. So, national security issues are women's issues, are mothers' issues as well. So, having the perspective of women and mothers and caretakers in general, it makes such a difference. I bring to this work an urgency, right? It's one thing to read a policy briefing on how children are just increasingly being exposed to everyday gun violence and gun violence in their schools. It's another thing to sit around the kitchen table and talk to your fourth grader about what the most recent school shooting means. Talk to them about the drills that they're having in their schools. Talk to them about the active shooter warning that happened while they were at the pool with their friends. It brings a real sense of urgency and personalization to the issue that is so needed right now.
So, you've paid close attention to, been an enormous advocate for caregiving and normalizing, bringing forward how members of Congress understand caregiving. So I'm wondering about then what kinds of investments in caregiving need to be made in order to support parents this fall. What should, both at the federal level and the state level, what should be done to give the support to families that they need?
Well, I think we've really set a great standard here in the state of Michigan with our TriShare program, which is a three-part program where the state, the employer, and the employee split the cost of childcare. I would love to see a program like this nationalized so that the entire country can take advantage of it. But it's been hugely successful, lowers the cost, and creates opportunities to expand childcare. One thing I've personally been doing is advocating for more funds to come to our district to expand childcare slots. We know that there are tens of thousands of needed childcare slots in my district alone. That's not even statewide. And it is a huge, huge difference. I also think one of the things we really need to be focusing on when we're talking about childcare is not only affordability, but quality. As we face one of the largest or lowest, excuse me, one of the lowest unemployment rates, the largest need for workers in the country right now, we've largely seen, parents really giving it a second look when they're thinking about going back to work if they don't have quality childcare for their kids. As a parent, I know this personally. You're not just going to leave your child in any situation, and going back to work has to be worth it. So as we think about expanding these slots and making it more affordable, we also have to think about the quality. And we know that early childhood education, early exposure to sounds and reading, even in those infant years, can make a lifetime difference for the learning of our children.
You are so absolutely right about that. So, as I begin to bring our 15 minutes together, and as I said, we count these in feminist minutes, uh, I do want to turn to the fact that you've been named one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. And I'm curious about what that means to you. Why is bipartisanship important to you?
Well, I don't know largely where your listeners come from in the country, but where I come from, I serve a district that is deeply divided. We're roughly, 50-50, Republicans and Democrats, and historically have been more Republican than Democrat. The call of a representative is not to serve your own individual agenda, but to serve your constituents. And so making sure that I am addressing the needs of my constituents, reaching across the aisle when and where possible. And I will also say, I think a big part of service today and doing effective bipartisanship is also knowing where to draw the line. There's no compromise when it comes to whether or not women get to make their own choices about their own bodies, their own healthcare decisions. That's not a compromise issue. But the level of funding that we might spend on our roads when we get to the surface reauthorization next year, let's have a robust discussion and talk about the best ways to use those funds. We don't control the House of Representatives right now. The only way to legislate is if you are finding a partner across the aisle to get things done. I think we in this country have gotten too far away from the importance of actually delivering and making our government work for the American people. And Congress has just become a place where it's too easy to politically grandstand. And that doesn't serve my constituents, and it doesn't serve our country.
And in fact, you've called it, you've said this Congress with an agenda of chaos has actually made it more challenging to cross party lines, but that you're finding opportunities to do just that. And you say that knowing when to give in and when to stand up and hold the line is hard, but it's values driven work. And it's something that your constituents have certainly found that you do successfully.
Yeah.
So, we come to the end of this time, and it's gone by way too quickly. So I am
It
very
is
much hoping.
50 minutes, not 15 minutes.
I know, right? And I'm hoping that we can do this again. But before I let you go, we ask on every episode about a silver lining because in these times there is so much chaos.
Yeah.
And for so many communities, there is a lot of darkness, a lot that they're trying to hold on to and lift up for their families. And so a silver lining really helps us to think about where we can go forward. So I'm wondering, in light of the bipartisanship that you move forward, in light of the issues that you've been caring about, from curbing gun violence to protecting families and promoting caregiving, what do you see as a silver lining in these times?
I'm so encouraged every day when I'm back in my district and talking to people who are engaged. I think when we think about the future of our country and our democracy, it's going to take uh, principled leaders. My friend Alyssa Slotkin talks about this a lot. Principled leaders and engaged constituents. I am working hard to be that type of responsive and principled leader every single day. But the engaged constituent part is a challenge in an age of 24-hour news cycles, tidbits online. It's hard for people to get the information that they need to engage, but I see it. I see it every day. And I am so inspired by the people who are paying attention and ready to help build a more just, livable, and sustainable world for our children.
Representative Hilary Scholten, thank you so very much for joining me for 15 minutes of feminism on our Ms. Studios platform. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Guests and listeners, that's it for today's episode of On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin at Ms. Magazine. I want to thank each of you for tuning in for the full story and engaging with us. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode where you know we'll be reporting, rebelling, and telling it just like it is. For more information about what we discussed today, head to MsMagazine.com and be sure to subscribe. And if you believe, as we do, that women's voices matter, that equality for all persons cannot be delayed, and that rebuilding America and being unbought and unbossed and reclaiming our time are important, then be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin at Ms. Magazine in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, wherever it is that you receive your podcast. We are ad-free and reader-supported. Help us reach new listeners by bringing this hard-hitting content in which you've come to expect and rely upon by subscribing. Let us know what you think about our show, and please support independent feminist media. Look for us at MsMagazine.com for new content and special episode updates. And if you want to reach us, please do so. Email us at ontheissues@MsMagazine.com. We do read our mail. This has been your host, Michelle Goodwin, reporting, rebelling, and telling it just like it is. On the Issues with Michelle Goodwin is a Ms. Magazine joint production. Michelle Goodwin and Kathy Spiller are our executive producers. Our producers for this episode are Roxy Zoll, Oliver Hogg, and also Allison Whelan. Our social media content producer is Sophia Panagrahi. The creative vision behind our work includes art and design by Brandy Phipps, editing by Natalie Holland, and music by Chris J. Lee.